Yeah, so hello, I welcome you all to the second day of Papillon Training 2023. What we're going to do today is cover speaker roles quickly. I'll take your questions in between the explanation or even afterwards. If there is an immediate doubt that you want to get clarified, please just give me a show of hands and I will acknowledge and then speak. Otherwise, keep putting your questions in the chat. I will entertain through chat. Um, okay, waiting for this to load. So basically, what I'm going to do is cover speaker roles. Roles not in terms of being prescriptive as to how should you how you should go about your speeches or how you should deliver it or what the chronology of rebuttal's argument should be like. I think as long as you know what the components of a speech are, you're pretty much to your own devices in terms of how you want to organize those components. Do you get it? So if I end up explaining that the first speech is supposed to encompass A, B, and C as components in the first speech, then I also do not mean that A, B, and C should happen in the same chronology or the same order. You can definitely change the chronology of occurrence. It's just for you to understand which component is used when and and then according to context of the debate, just use whichever component is more important, more significantly as compared to the other. So the uh, weightage that each component is going to have and how you're going to use it, how you're going to place it in the speech is entirely contingent on the debate room that you're on the debate you're in a part of right now and how it's working. So sometimes rebuttals are required exclusively because the other side is very good with their argumentation. But sometimes rebuttals aren't even too necessary because the other side is running a negative case and they don't have very significant comebacks to your case despite a negative line. So in that case, you don't have to particularly rebut. You can just integrate your rebuttals with the argument. Sometimes integration is not enough. Sometimes you need to explicitly rebut. So all of those things vary. This is not what I'm going to prescribe today. I'm just going to explain what happens when and what is it that is absolutely imperative for you to follow. The variation that you bring about in the debate is entirely up to you as a debater. Now, we are discussing the first speech when we discuss framing. So framing is basically, it comprises of three components. Can you guys quickly tell me what those are?
Assertion, reasoning, evidence.
That's the structure of an argument. What is framing? Three components of framing.
Key terms.
Yeah, characterization is one part.
Stakeholders.
Good. Stakeholders.
Status quo.
Perfect. So three components, characterization, stakeholders, status quo, all of them together make framing. Okay. And framing, as the word explains, is for you to set up the ground upon which the debate will happen, which is why this is done by the first speaker. The framing in terms of how you're supposed to go about it. So basically, you need to understand this small thing about framing. There is a status quo, okay? And status quo means the context. So, where is this debate happening? What kind of a world is it? So, when I talk about status quo, I can say this is a world where democracies are prevalent politically in the political ecosystems of almost every country. So, this is my status quo. Now, democracies shape the people in it. Am I right? And the people define terms within a democracy. I'll explain this better. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that it is through the status quo that everything else develops. You can look at it like that. When I know the world, like if this is the world and it is this world that is being talked of in the debate, then first I will define the world. What does it look like? Then I will define the people in it, right? And once I've defined the people in it, then I will define how these people characterize the terms in the motion. For example, if the world is one where there is the world under consideration of one where where democracies are prevalent and that is status quo, then what are the kind of people that you're going to find in these kinds of contexts? The people are going to be ones who follow democracy, which means they respect stuff like human rights and just equality, secularism, stuff like that. So status quo shaped people's ideas, right? And then people will shape what religion is supposed to mean, or demo, or like any other term is supposed to mean, based on what they have been taught by a democratic context. So status quo is first because it explains how the stakeholders should be defined, and that in turn explains how the terms are supposed to be defined, the characterization is supposed to be done. Does that make sense to you guys? Or no? Not. I mean, you can ask me questions.
It makes sense, man. For me.
Cool. So now again, if you're going to do the framing, this is how you should think about it ideally when you don't know what to do. But sometimes you might want to think about stakeholders before status quo, or status quo after characterization, or characterization at the before status quo. All of this that is doable. Okay. None of this is prescriptive. I'm just saying if you do it like this, it's easier to understand. If you do it like with stakeholders first, it might be easier for you to understand. But my preference is where you think about status quo first. All right. With that out of the way, what is status quo? What are stakeholders, and what is characterization essentially? Status quo is basically when you're trying to explain the world of which you're a part. So, for example, see, the world remains the same, which means that it doesn't matter which motion you're debating on. When you're debating on it, the world will not change for this very small debate you're happening in some nook and corner of the world, right? So what's the point of defining the world even if it does not change and it remains the same on both the sides? Can anyone tell me? Why do we need status quo at all?
And we need status quo to define what type of world we live in so that the debate can be in our favor.
Yeah, yes. So debates operate within a world. They can't operate in a vacuum. You can't make a debate operate in Mars on or like in space on Mars. I'm sorry. So the thing is that you need a context because that context shapes the debate. For example, if I talk about poverty in a developing country, that's going to be a very different debate as compared to poverty in a developed country. Do you get it? This is why status quo is important. The entire debate changes when the context changes. And again, both opposition and proposition can have different understanding of the world when they are on like either side of the house. What does that mean? Let's consider a motion like the one that we were discussing yesterday as well. This house regrets the glorification of motherhood. So when you approach this motion, what happens is that when you're on government side, you have to paint the world in such a way that regretting the glorification of motherhood actually makes sense. This means that you will say that in status quo, glorification has already happened and we don't think it has been beneficial. That's why we want to change it. But on opposition, you will say, no, mothers are not appreciated enough still. And we want mothers to be appreciated more than they are, which is why we support the glorification. This means that your conceptualization of the world and how women or mothers in particular are treated in this world is going to change based on the interest that you have being on a particular side. Does that make sense? So status quo is different for different people. Now, do this. You guys have to do this. This house regrets the narrative that women can have it all. This is a motion. I'm giving you guys 5 minutes. Put your argument in the chat or your status quo in the chat. If you were on government side, how would you shape the world within which this debate is happening?
I'm not able to see your screen. Could you please show screen?
Yeah, you're not able to see the screen. That was a deliberate thing that I did because my slide has some examples of how status quo can be defined here. I'm just going to copy paste the motion on Zoom chat. If you were on government, what would your status quo look like? That's the question. Please enter your inputs by 6:20. We will discuss them. Okay, I want everybody to make their responses public. Do not DM them to me. So, Naisha, make your response public.
Ma'am, I didn't exactly understand the motion. So, like, are we trying to say that, like, women in general, like, can have all these things, and like that we should like give all the opportunities to women, or like, are we saying something else?
So basically, we are regretting this narrative where you're trying to say that women can have it all. So like making like feeding women this narrative that you can have it all if you try hard enough for it. So you're regretting that narrative on government. That's what the motion is about. All right, I think I have inputs from Kabir, Zainab, Salmia, Rubani, Naisha, Shirja. It's just Shri that I'm not getting, I haven't received a response from, I think. Please enter your response and then, meanwhile, let's just discuss what we have. So Naisha's response was the first one that I received. It says men have already had their chance, so it's time that women have their chance too and have it all. Op says that there should be equality amongst men and women, but men have had it all since the past 2 million years. So why shouldn't women get their chance too? Why shouldn't we preach inequality too? Basically, the status quo that Naisha is trying to shape is one where she's trying to portray men as privileged individuals who have had a soft living all their life. And now women should also be motivated to go in that same direction. So I think, Naisha, you ended up proposing the status quo from side up, where you're supporting the narrative of having it all, which is fine. You can say that have it all is important for women because that's how you survive, and men have been doing it all because of which they think they're better. So to offset the tendency of superiority, you need to also get as much. I think that's like a good enough characterization of status quo. It just could have been articulated better. As in, you could have like told me rather than just rhetorically saying that men have had it all since the last 2 million years or something. You need to tell me why we need to reciprocate that attitude. If men have tried to be at the top of everything, why is that incentive enough for women to follow in the same vein? Or why is it like incentive enough for us to follow suit? Why does status quo demand that? That's just one element that's missing in your status quo, otherwise well and good. As far as Rubani's claim is concerned, we live in a world where that narrative that where the narrative that women can have it all has led to unrealistic expectations along with unnecessary pressure. Fair, yes. Government side can run this as their status quo characterization. I just think that the status quo should be more refined than this. As in, if you're giving a sentence, it's likely that it will be easily deconstructed by the other side.
Continued it right towards the end. I sent it before finishing it.
Oh, all right. So we'll read it when we come to it. All right. Then we're just going to bypass Rubani's initial comment for now. Coming to Zainab's government, from the government side, her characterization of status quo reads, this motion in itself is forging the pressure on women. The narrative women can have it all makes every woman think that she can do anything. And this leads to more and more disappointment. We live in a world where imperfections are innate. So by adopting this narrative, we are telling women that they are perfect, but when actually they are not. And when they realize it, the self-loathing in them rises. Okay, fair. This is layered, which is what I appreciate about this characterization. And it also explains why the status quo is problematic. So when you're giving the definition of your status quo, you're also supposed to tell me why it's problematic or why it's conducive for the growth of something. Right here, you're supposed to say that glorification of motherhood is problematic. So you have to tell me what it is that is such a problem in the status quo, which I think Zainab's articulation does. The only thing that I might add some value to here is that when you talk about disappointment, you also have to think about it preemptively. Opposition is going to say that when women can't like do a job because they are rearing children, or when they are when they can't rear children because they're doing a job, it leads to an unfulfilling life when men can have it both. So why is it that women should not also be told to aspire to the same standards? If men can do it, why not women? They will just share the burden with men now if that kind of narrative is perpetuated. So you have to ensure that your argument is foolproof to that kind of a characterization. So preemptively in like talk about what the op might say as their status quo and then say why that's going to be wrong. That'd be nice. All right, Shirja's response. Supportive structures, policies, and cultural attitudes are crucial for enabling individuals to navigate the challenge of balancing work and personal life. However, many societies lack adequate support systems such as affordable childcare, flexible work arrangements, equal sharing of domestic responsibilities. Without these critical elements, it becomes even more challenging for women to pursue both a successful career and a fulfilling family life. Further undermining the idea that they can have it all. I think this is the best so far because this literally talks about. I mean, I think you guys should also like learn from each other. So, like, this is good because it talks about supportive structures lacking, particularly hints at the problem that's still untouched or untended in this system right now, because of which regretting glorification is a good of having it all is a good thing. This means that she's giving me a very specific reason for why it is important for us to regret the narrative of having it all, because even if women aspire to have it all, they're unlikely to attain all of those things because of the structural barriers. So you shouldn't tell women to have it all unless you fix these structures which serve as impediments in their growth. So Zainab, now coming back to your this thing, I think the only thing because of which Shrija's characterization becomes slightly better is because it is also nicely preempting the point that opposition might raise about why wouldn't you want women to aspire to do big things. She's saying that sure, you could want women to aspire to do big things, but they will not be able to succeed. It's not about their aspiration, it's about structures changing. It's not about women not being motivated enough in status quo. It's that even when they try their best, they're unable to get anywhere because of the small scope within which they work. Right? So that's that. Good attempt there. On to Kabir's characterization. This debate takes place in a developed and leftist world where it is thought, wherein the thought process has already been begun and some do not get enough time to do this all. Okay, how does leftism impact this
Yeah.
idea of having it all?
Okay, so leftism it's basically equality. So in the leftist world, there would be women who are saying that we want to do it all because men have been doing it all. So that's why there's this leftist world.
Okay, I'll give you one advice. This is not
Yes.
for Kabir. This is for everybody. Never, never use words which are heavy in connotation. Do you get it? This means that leftism does not just mean a sense of like leftists, sure, they believe in gender equality and things like that. But leftism stands for a lot of agendas. It's like a political party almost. I mean, it's bigger than a party actually. There can be leftist political parties, there can be leftist individuals, there can be leftist nations, which means leftism is a very, very uh, huge burden for you to take because it encompasses so much. So every time you use this word, you're supporting or you're talking about everything that leftism is about, not just the gender equality aspect. So, like, resist using these terms because they will backfire if somebody else knows better than, I mean, knows leftism better than you do. Simplify things and don't use fancy terms at all. If you want to use terms, then simplify your concept. Don't use the terms, use the concept. Like you just explained leftism to me, right?
Yes.
Just do that in the argument itself. That'd be better, right? Okay. Men have already, this is Naisha. Men have already had their chance. Oh, can you guys read your arguments? I'm really paused every time I'm done with an argument. Naisha, can you start with reading yours, please? Naisha, over here.
It's the same as before.
Oh,
Yeah, I had sent it. I just sent it publicly. You told me to.
okay, okay. So yeah, my response to this characterization is that only. It's slightly rhetorical. That needs to change. If you're saying that, see, for example, men have had it all since the past 2 million years. This is not a statement that says anything new about what you have initially claimed, right? That men have already had their chance in the first statement. So this is repetitive. Try not having the tendency of being repetitive, which tends to happen. But remember, you have only 8 minutes. So try to cut down on the rhetorics and automatically talk about why, if men have already had that, it's time that women also start striving for it and why that's important and why that won't be counterproductive in status quo. There's a lot of questions that you need to answer in status quo. So try not being repetitive in order to save time. All right. Women in a loop. So this is Rubani. This narrative has put women in a loop. Rubani, can you read your argument, please?
This narrative has put women in a loop where they are constantly judging themselves and comparing themselves because having it all implies that women can excel in every aspect of their life, which is quite unrealistic for every human, regardless of their gender.
Oh, okay. So you're basically saying that not just women, but everybody should desist from telling each other that they can have it all because nobody can.
Yeah. And how
Okay.
it's create a false belief here and a false hope for women.
Right, okay. But you have to, okay. So this characterization as such is not a problem. It makes sense, but it can be made better because of the same reason that I gave to like Shirja and Zainab, right? About how you need to specify the concern in status quo.
Yeah.
So like if you're saying that women basically that it's going to lead to pressure and burden and that it's going to be unrealistic, why do you think it's going to be unrealistic? It's slightly assertive there, right? Maybe people will feel motivated, right? People have had both all kinds of things in their life. It's not like nobody has ever done both a job and have a family at the same time. Most of the people have both those things. So
Yeah.
why can't
But
people just strike a balance? And yeah,
but excelling in both the aspects can be quite unrealistic because you can't really it's simply unrealistic because no one can be excelling in both aspects at the
simply
same time.
unrealistic, yes. So it's not what you're trying to say is that not it's not simply unrealistic, it's intuitively unrealistic, right? Intuitively,
Yeah.
something tells you that it's impossible for somebody to excel at everything at one time. Two things here.
Yeah.
One, even if you think something is true intuitively, you still need to articulate it in such a way that the other person understands your intuition,
Yeah.
right? Secondly, nobody is talking about excellence in every field. Everybody is just talking about having it. So this means that if I have a job and if I have a family and if I'm only mediocre at managing both of these things, it's fine. I still have it all. Nobody's talking about like being the best of the best in every realm you enter. Do you get it?
Yeah, got it.
So excellence is something that you're presuming in your characterization.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Saranya, status quo. Can you please read it out for everyone?
Yes. As we can see in our daily lives, women these days have so many different opportunities. People nowadays are pushing other women to go and do more than they can. This can lead to pressure and depression. I could have elaborated a bit more, but like I wasn't exactly sure.
Yes, I think your troubleshooting is accurate. You could have elaborated more because see, all of you are coming with the same kind of arguments, right? Besides, I think Shirja and Zainab and also Kabir. Kabir had a different kind of like status quo. He just like the term he used was confusing. But all of us are coming with the same kind of status quo, which is going to happen in debates because we live in the same world, we derive meaning from the same world. So our arguments are likely to be similar. So the tipping point in debates is always how accurate, is always the accuracy or precision with which you can articulate the same thought that other people are also talking about. It's about how many layers can you add to it. How many, so like if you're talking, it leads to pressure about pressure and depression. Why is depression something that's necessarily going to be heightened by this claim alone? Why will it not ever become aspiration? Those kinds of refinements are required for you to distinguish yourself from the run-of-the-mill arguments that you will see at a tournament. Does that make sense? All right. Rubani, we've already had a response from. Shri, can you read your argument, please? I think we need to move to other things. We're already past 30 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, the idea that women can effortlessly balance career, family, and personal aspirations may set unrealistic expectations and put undue pressure on women. It downplays the challenges and sacrifices involved in managing multiple roles effectively. Juggling multiple roles can take a toll on women's emotional and mental well-being. The pressure to excel in all areas can contribute to stress, burnout, and feelings of inadequacy.
Okay, this is also a similar claim, but I will give this more weightage because it's slightly more analyzed. Do you guys understand now? So Shri's idea talks about like juggling multiple roles and how that leads to a toll and mental and emotional well-being is then compromised. What can be additionally done in status quo is also you guys giving examples. Understand status quo is never it's never this one line thing that you do. It's always detailed. Sometimes the status quo might even run into like a minute long explanation in the first speech. Give status quo time, give stakeholders time. That requires that sets up your debate. So basically, you can also give examples of what the life of a person who's trying to have it all looks like. You can say it's the world where everybody believes in hustle culture, right? Everybody believes in surpassing the other in terms of how well they're doing monetarily, but also how well their kids are doing at school. So I cannot, as an individual, be with the child to ensure they're doing well, be at the workplace while do the I don't know the meals for all the day and still like expect my emotional well-being or like other things to not suffer, because I'm not giving myself any time. Self-care is becomes starts getting villainized in the process. Do you get it? It at any instance, if I'm not productive, I loathe myself for not being productive because I have so much to do always. This leads to burnout. There's nothing I mean, everything that I'm saying is very generic and it's basic, but it gives the adjudicator a certain sense of where I'm coming from because I'm articulating what these problems look like. I'm not just talking about them on a theoretical plane. Do you guys understand? That gives credibility to your argument. That immediacy of like a certain situation has to be created. When I talk about the domestic chores, when I talk about the workplace, when I talk about the boss nagging you about every little thing and the pressure, the workload, then it starts making sense to everybody because everybody comes from the same world and context, and they start resonating with what you're saying. So even if we want to use rhetorics, it should always have the kind of emotional appeal which will automatically make the adjudicator resonate with what you're saying because they have shared experience of what you're saying. All right. Okay, I think now we're going to just move. I think I've taken response, at least one response from everybody. Now we're going to move to the other bits, which is your stakeholders and characterization. So look at the status quo on Gov, which some examples here. This is definitely not analyzed. This I didn't intend to analyze this. Feminist movement has been trying to get women to do everything all at once. That's something that I think this is the status quo that all of you came up with, most of you came up with. That women have been pushed into doing a lot of things at once, and this has led to like stuff like burnout, etc. And then this builds pressure to excel and leads to breakdown. Again, something that you have talked about already. Women fail more under such a narrative. This is like one layer extra to all that you guys were saying, right? That women fail more. So I am saying that under this narrative that women can have it all, they're likely to fail in everything they do. So it's better for me to just be a mother or just have a job and not tap into the other realms which I don't have time for. Because when you have your finger in all the pies, you're likely to be worse off in every situation because you're unable to introduce depth into anything that you're doing. You have divided attention at all times. So that's how you can refine your argument. I think I don't need to elaborate more on that. Quickly covering characterization of terms then. Characterization is just basically defining terms in the motion, right? Why do you define terms in the motion? I think this is important. It's important that you understand this. Somebody must have taught you characterization before I did here. So I don't intend to repeat stuff. Defining terms is pretty simple. What does glorification mean? What does motherhood look like? All of those things need to be defined. But why do you define is the bigger question. Why the need to define stuff? Don't people already know what glorification means? Or don't people already know what motherhood stands for? Sure, they do. But we are not talking about the lexical meanings here, as in the dictionary meaning of words. We are talking about multiplicity of meaning in a term, which means that motherhood to me might be a burden, right? Because I don't appreciate motherhood. I don't like kids, whatever. But for my mother, it might be a blessing, right? And for some others, for example, for women, motherhood is a huge challenge because they go through the worst of like things that motherhood has, or like just parenting includes. But for like men, motherhood might be like a very easy thing because they don't see it as difficult. I'm saying just hypothetically that might be true. This means that different people can have different perceptions of motherhood. We just found 4 for ourselves. So this is why it's important for you to describe which perception are you entering this debate. And the perception that you should use is not the perception that you naturally are inclined towards. The perception or definition that you should use is the one which is going to benefit you the most from the side that you're on. For example, when you regret the glorification of motherhood, then you will try to find the bad stuff in motherhood, right? Or like the counterproductive things about motherhood, because then you can regret the glorification more easily. Do you guys agree? But if you're an op, you're likely to find the positives of motherhood by saying that, look, glorification is good because motherhood can be fulfilling and motherhood can actually get women to self-actualize and things of that kind. This means that how I define motherhood is largely described by, what is it described by?
The perception you take.
Yeah. And what is the perception described by? Like, how do I decide, should I about like whether I should negatively define motherhood or positively define it.
By which side you're like saying from?
Yes, good. Good. Okay. Moving on then. I think this is understood. So you picking a subjective understanding always. Always remember this. If you talk, let's say, leave motherhood. Motherhood is still very subjective. If you're talking about India per se, do you think India changes every time you define it a certain way? India as it exists, with its people, with its villages, with its cities, its culture, none of it changes for your insignificant debate rounds that you have at random tournaments. I mean, this I'm saying insignificant debates for everybody. I mean, a country does not change for a debate. Oh, nobody changes for a debate round. So why? How can we characterize it differently if nothing changes and everything is so static? We can define it by specifying a certain angle more than the other. Okay, I'll explain this better through the example of a photo. So all of us look the same at all times, right? Like when we are all dolled up, we look the same. We can just like elevate our looks by a little bit of flourish with the makeup and like with fancy clothes, but otherwise we look the same. Some photos though are better than some other photos of us from the same event. What do you think? Why do you think that happens?
Because we take them from different angles.
Good. Some angles are more flattering than the other angles. It's the same kind of thing with India or characterizing any term. You are defining India, but you're defining it from an angle where it would be thought of as a great country when you have to support India. Get it? But when you have to like say something negative about a developing country like India, then you're going to look at it from an angle which changes your perception of India. I could talk about diversity as a boon, and I could also talk about it as like a bane. How I choose to talk about diversity depends on the vantage point or the a place from where I'm perceiving it. If I perceive it from here, it looks different. If I perceive it from here, it's different. This is the only thing that makes your characterization of terms different from the characterization that the other side gives. Does that make sense? The thing as such does not change. Your characterization changes because you start looking at it from an angle which you did perceive earlier or initially. How do you find these angles? You simply think about all the possible features that India has and which ones are the best for you to use. Do you get it? For example, if it's a debate on India, I will think about India from all aspects. Okay, India is a diverse country. India is also a decolonized country. India has a rich culture and heritage. India is known for its big market. India is potentially a good contender for the UN Permanent Security Council seat. So many things about India, random stuff. I will narrow this down to what I need specifically in the debate because I can't use all of these details. Do you get it? So start with the most generic things and break it down to what you genuinely need according to the side you're on. All right, moving on. Are there any questions? Okay, assuming there are none. Moving on to stakeholders. When we're talking about, like when we're having a debate, it always concerns specific individuals. These individuals are stakeholders in a debate. Now, if you look at the pointers that you have in here, individuals and collectives both count as stakeholders. For example, individual would be Saranya, Kabir, Zainab, me, Ruwani, everybody. We are individuals. We can be stakeholders in a debate. Like Gandhi, Hitler, Trump, Modi, all of these people could be stakeholders in a debate. But a collective could also be a stakeholder. For example, an MNC is not an individual, but it could still be a stakeholder. Google as a company could be a stakeholder. An NGO could be a stakeholder. A feminist, like, I'm sorry, not feminism as such, but a movement. It could be feminism or Marxism or whichever movement could be a stakeholder. So stakeholders aren't always people. They can also be organizations which are run by people. Please keep that in mind. The second point says that one person, famous or not, can be a stakeholder. This means that your stakeholders don't always have to be famous individuals. They can be this can be anyone, right? But mostly you should always think about a debate from a minority perspective. Nobody will tell you this because it's almost a shortcut of sorts. I figured this out myself when I started debating. but minorities are talked of the most because the majority groups will be privileged all the time. Even if there is the worst kind of flood come that's like befallen a specific area where the rich people live, the rich people can still flee that area, right? And go elsewhere because they have money. Who is the one who gets caught in that web of things and is automatically consumed by the disaster?
Poor people.
Good. So who should be the people that you're trying to benefit in debates, the rich or the poor?
Poor.
Yeah. That is why, by this logic, always think about a debate from a minority perspective. What would the minority group want? How will the minority group suffer or fare in by what I'm proposing? That's a good way of thinking about going about debates. Not many people do that. Those who do fare well generally. Okay. I think this is quite repetitive. I'm not going to cover subjective realm. I've explained that. So there are a couple of steps that you can use to narrow down your stakeholders because there can be multiple stakeholders in a debate. I can't even begin to explain how diverse your set of stakeholders can begin if become when you start thinking about emotion seriously. So how you should narrow it down is first identify the possible stakeholders, think about all possible stakeholders, then find subcategories like women. It's a very general category of stakeholders, so narrow it down to women who are rich and women who are poor. So women can be further divided into two classes, right? Rich and poor. Likewise, women can be white. To talk about. So it's better to actually talk about individuals as like further broken down bifurcated categories to introduce nuance in your debate. All right. The next point says that narrow your stakeholders down to the ones you generally wish to use. For example, sure, women can be broken down into this bifurcation, this one, and this one, but not all of it should be deployed by me in a motion. Maybe in a particular motion, I should only talk about the rich poor binary of women. In some other debate, though, the working and housewife binary works better. For example, the motion under discussion that we had just now of having it all, which binary would it use more?
Working / housewives.
Perfect. So this binary helped me. I didn't have to use this binary. I could have used it, but I didn't have to. So that kind of a discussion is also important. Fair. I don't think, I mean, D is slightly complicated. I don't want to confuse you with that. So framing, now I've explained framing to you today, and this is basically what the first speaker is supposed to do. Framing is not something that you can finish in like a minute. If you are finishing it under a minute, there's something seriously wrong with your framing. Framing should take time. Explaining stakeholders, status quo, characterization. If it happens under a minute, it means all of what you've said is underanalyzed. It's simply assertive. Assertive stuff is the worst kind of thing that you can. Okay, I think I got disconnected. Sorry about that. Did you have a question, Zena?
I actually wanted to see whether it was my connection or not.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
I think I'm going to join from my tab as well, just to be on the safe side. Cool. So what we're essentially saying here, what was the last thing that you guys heard? I actually covered quite a lot, assuming that I was audible.
Assertion is the worst type of.
Okay, great. That's where I left. So assertions are not good because they render your I mean, assertions are not arguments. As simple as that. You can't just say that, oh, something leads to motivation because I think so. That's like, sure, you think like that, but I'm not going to buy it as an adjudicator unless you tell me why motivation is likely to occur and why fear will not replace motivation. Okay, wait, let me join from the tab. I think this is annoying me now. Is this any better?
Yeah, it is.
All right. So basically, what we need to understand is that when we are talking about a particular motion, you have to know that your side is not a credible side at all, because the other side also has an exactly opposite direction to what you're saying, which the adjudicator can buy into. If you want the adjudicator to still come with you, despite both of you being equally persuasive, then you need to give added analysis, layers to prove your point, which is why assertions are something that should be very like vehemently opposed. Cool. Besides that, I think in terms of stakeholders and characterization, that's all you need to know. First speakers are supposed to do at least 2-3 minutes. 2 minutes is also less. At least 3 minutes of character framing. And framing includes all of these components: characterization, status quo, stakeholders. Your framing has to be strong. Even if you've like spent 4 minutes of your 8 minutes in framing, that's good enough. First speaker is supposed to do just that. And after you're done with the framing, just articulate the arguments that you have, but not analyze them so much. You can definitely give an argument and give a 2-line explanation of what this argument means, but not go beyond that, because your deputy can carry them forward. That's what they're supposed to do. Rebuild the argument that you're going to first ensconce in the debate, which means that as long as you're able to just get across the argument, is good enough. Don't take the burden upon yourself of explaining every argument, and please get out of this habit of saying that, okay, let's divide arguments and conquer. That's not how debates happen. If you have 4 arguments, all the 4 arguments should feature in the first speech, and these 4 arguments then can be analyzed by giving equal time to each by the deputy. Don't say, okay, my first speaker can cover one, I will cover the second one, Whip will cover the third one. The problem then is that, first of all, Whip can't introduce new arguments, it will be dumb. But even if deputy is given, like, allowed that privilege of coming up with a new argument, it's still like tricky, because if you're going to analyze your argument from scratch, you're going to not have the time to analyze the first speaker's argument, which means that all of your arguments will not have the attention that they need, because each argument needs to be analyzed by both the speakers, in fact all 3 of the speakers. So it can't be that one speaker does all the explanation of an argument. It does not show any consistency in the speeches like that. So please ensure that all the arguments are mentioned in the first speech, and then they are carried forward in the second. Deputy speeches are supposed to analyze, elaborate the points that have already been made. They are supposed to introduce new points as well, but not at the cost of reiterating what the first speaker said. I hope I've made myself clear. That's a very common slippage I notice people like doing all the time. Cool. So first speaker, framing, followed by arguments, and just what your deputy speaker will do, a little bit of an overview of that. Please close your speech, take a POI if you still have time and if you're a fast speaker. Second speaker then is supposed to elaborate all that has been said in the first speech. This means that the second speech should largely be thought of as explanatory in nature. You need to explain things extensively as the second speaker in order to make it more persuasive and also to just rebuild. You have already been attacked by the time you're delivering your second speech because the first speaker from the other side has tried to butcher your case, which means that you also need to actively rebut in deputy speeches. Deputy speeches are characterized by significantly two things: rebuilding and rebutting. Rebuilding is when you build the case that your first speaker has already tried to set the ground for, and rebuttal is when you actually go ahead and actively call out the opposition for bad claims. So deputy speech is not very difficult. Rebuttals and analysis. Analysis again is not something that I can necessarily like teach you. You have to be mindful of it yourself and practice it by yourself by delivering 7-minute long speeches in front of the mirror, pick a motion, prep for 15 minutes. That definitely makes you a better speaker. All right. You can also read through this if it helps at all. So value addition is something that I have actually highlighted here. What do you think value addition means in general?
Or maybe adding a value to something, just literally as it said.
Literally, yes. What do you think value addition might mean as a role the deputy speaker is supposed to play in the argument formation?
Just you, as you said, that they need to explain the arguments, that maybe analyze it.
Good, yes, analyze. Others?
It could also be that they add more value to it because obviously the other team is going to attack the argument. So you need to add more value to it so that it is feasible.
Yes, good. Basically, when you make an argument in the case prep, it's just a very generic argument and then it gets attacked, which means you might even have to extend this argument, broaden its scope, add a layer to it. Don't fret in doing that. You can do that. Okay. Avana, I'll just conclude in the next 5 minutes. If you want to leave, the recording is on. It shouldn't be a problem. So basically, when you're adding value, this is particularly to say that you don't have to repeat what the first speaker said. That's a really bad thing to do. And a lot of deputies end up doing that for very weird reasons I don't quite understand. But reiterating the same point, does it help? No. It's not like poetry, where if you like use repetition as a device, it sounds more convincing. It's not that. If something is convincing, it will be convincing in the first go. If something is unconvincing, it will remain unconvincing unless you give it explanation and analysis. So give wide-ranging analysis. That's what value addition means. All right. And quickly going over the whip speeches as well then, in the last 2-3 minutes that I have. Whip speeches are easy. You just have to find your way around them. Like that, this is very, very personal as to how you go about your whip speeches. So whip speeches are about comparisons, comparatives. It's like a biased adjudication. Why? What are the arguments on my side? So if I'm Gov, these are the arguments on my side. These are the arguments on their side. What are the clashes in this debate? For example, in this argument and in this argument, both of us are talking about, let's say, the safety of women. So safety of women becomes a clash which both sides have talked about, right? But a whip speaker is supposed to first say, this is what we said, this is what they said. The clash is here, the safety of women, because both of us are talking about that and want that. But we think we are able to furnish safety of women more than the opposition because of so and so reasons. So you compare and then you prove why you're better on a comparative. That's what whip speakers do. They can also rebut. They can't give new arguments. They can give new examples, but definitely not new arguments. It's counted as whip dump. Whip dump is not considered by AGIS. So that's that, guys. Points of information I will cover in detail tomorrow. But for speaker roles, that's pretty much it. I will take questions if you guys have any. Any questions?
As for the practice, you said to pick up any topic and talk about it for 7 to 8 minutes. But the
Yeah.
fact, for maximum, I can just talk about 3 minutes, without writing it on paper. And, it's just 3 minutes. It doesn't go up to 7 minutes.
But today you learned framing, right? And framing in and of itself will take a lot of your time. And then arguments and analysis. You're probably not doing enough of an analysis if you're ending it at 3 minutes. That's the thing. Analyze as in explain like I'm 5. When you're trying to explain something to a 5-year-old, it takes a lot of time. So explain everything. Don't think that something is understood. Don't think that people know the importance of feminism.
So one more thing. So can I use the paper in this to write bullet points on it or no?
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Okay.
Ma'am, I wrote like a few speeches for my practice. Can I send them so that to see if they're fine?
It'd be nice if you can record it and send, because I
Okay.
mean, if I'm occupied through the day, it's very difficult for me to read through things. I can still listen.
Okay, yeah, I'll record them.
All right. Also, you can have bullet points. Some people even write their entire speeches beforehand. So, I mean, I don't suggest doing that. It's because no point. Entire speeches need not be written. Have bullet points and deliver. It also makes you a more confident speaker. If you're writing the entire speech, I don't quite get the point. But if you have to write it, then it's fine. Like, if you can't do without writing, then it's fine. Okay, guys? All right, then I'll see you tomorrow. We'll probably do some practice tomorrow because we only have points of information to cover now. So see you guys tomorrow. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.